Are you looking for your next wine challenge? Do you want to taste more than 300 wines in 4 days? How about joining a community of passionate, qualified Italian wine specialists and gaining one of the most coveted qualifications in the wine world? Apply now to the Vinitaly International Academy and you'll have all this at your fingertips. Pedro Ballesteros, Master of Wine, says, VIA is the only Italian wine program that delivers high-quality training and serious exams. More details on our website www.vinitalyinternational.com.
Italian Wine Podcast. Chin Chin with Italian wine people.
Hello, this is the Italian Wine Podcast. My name is Monty, Waldin. My guest today is Simon Woolf. Simon, where are you at the moment?
I'm in Amsterdam, Monty, where I live.
How did you end up in Amsterdam?
So I ended up in Amsterdam actually for nothing to do with wine. Basically, about 6 years ago, my main career was in IT at the time, and wine was very much a part-time pursuit. And I actually moved to Amsterdam to follow an IT job. It was kind of chance, really. Both my girlfriend and I had the opportunity to move countries, and we thought this could be fun to try living somewhere else. Amsterdam seems kind of nice. Let's give it a try.
And you're still there after how many years?
We're still here after 6 years, so yeah.
And so how did you, obviously you had a sort of previous career, I mean, is your IT career ongoing still, or are you 100% wine now? Or do the two coincide? I'm
pretty much 100% wine. I mean, once in a while I do maybe a little bit of consultancy or support for IT clients that I've had for donkey's years. But yeah, wine is pretty much 100% these days, especially after the book that I published a year or two ago, because that's kept me quite busy.
And what's the name of the book?
The name of the book is Amber Revolution.
So that, I mean, you know, you're obviously a natural wine fan. How did you decide to follow that sort of not trend, if you like, but that sort of style of winemaking? Was it just you had a glass of wine and you loved it, or what was the reason? Yeah,
it was kind of chance and kind of not. I mean, I've always had a very strong belief that the only sensible way to farm is to farm organically or even biodynamically. So that's always been a strong thread in my life. It's something that my parents instilled into me, actually, because we grew up on a kind of small self-sufficiency kind of farm. So when I first started getting really into wine and writing about it, I was always more interested in people who were on that side of the fence, so to speak. And so, of course, if you're mixing with a lot of winemakers who are working with organic viticulture, then at some point you're going to come across natural wine. And I did around about 2011, I guess. And I was stunned, actually. I was stunned by how vivid some of these wines can be. So my initial experiences were very positive indeed. And then I realized that this is actually a highly controversial area of winemaking. And so I think I also realized, maybe slightly naughtily, but it's actually rather fun to write about because people argue about it all the time.
So, I mean, for you, it's more than just a talking point for you, though, isn't it? I mean, you obviously got a love of these particular wines. I mean, when you say they're challenging, what do you mean by that?
Well, what I think the word I used was controversial, because I realised that people have a hard time agreeing on when a natural wine is good wine, or when it might have something that some people would term a fault. So I think that's the interesting thing. There's been this kind of search for perfection, maybe in the 20th century, where everybody thought that the right way to make wine was to use as much technology as possible and paper over the cracks. And of course, natural wine, the natural wine philosophy is saying the exact opposite. It's almost celebrating the idea that wine is often not something perfect. It often has quirks and idiosyncrasies. And I think that's part of what makes it beautiful, really.
I mean, but you're not like, obviously you know that I'm sort of into biodynamics, but I don't consider myself as a fundamentalist. Do you consider yourself as a fundamentalist, or just someone who's very sensible and mindful of what he's consuming? What's your tolerance for sort of really funky, really natural wines that some people would say are just so faulty they're almost standardized?
Yeah, my tolerance is limited. I'm definitely not a fundamentalist. I think the point that I'm coming from in this is really, I'm coming from a very selfish point of what I personally like to drink. And I think more and more as time goes on, I don't find wines that have been made in a heavily interventionist way very enjoyable or interesting. I don't find them enjoyable to drink, and often I can't find very much to write about them either. So that tends to be what draws me to people who are working at the limits of minimal intervention. That said, it is very frustrating when you hear people celebrating wine that is just faulty and nothing else. And I have limited tolerance for wine where something's clearly gone wrong, yet people are still happy to say, "Oh, this is wonderful. It's so expressive of the terroir," when it clearly isn't. But I think we're maybe still in an early phase here. There's still, there are still a lot of people who are excited that there's a different niche in wine, that there's something that's maybe a bit more dynamic and fun, and it'll take time to shake that down and maybe sort of throw off the emperor's new clothes in the places where they do appear. I
mean, my argument, I don't know if you'd agree with this, is take your point about the sort of quotes, the modern industrial wines that we were drinking maybe 15 years ago, because a lot of them just taste the same. And I always have to choose my words carefully, but in a for example, a natural wine fair, if you have 4 wines that come from different countries and they all have the same predominant fault, for me that also is a sort of standardization by the back door. It's quite interesting to hear you. I think you're on the same page, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are always wines, even in the natural wine niche, where you can see that actually the decisions that the winemaker has made have had a greater impact on the style of the wine than anything else. But that's something I accept. I mean, I do attach an enormous amount to the drinkability of a wine, and I think that for me that's the final arbiter in a lot of cases. So terroir is a wonderful concept. I think as a word it's hideously overused. Also, I think a lot of the time when winemakers try to take themselves out of the equation and say, "Oh, my wine is just about the place," I think that's actually bullshit. It's almost impossible not to have something of yourself in a wine. There are so many decisions that get made, even if it's things like harvest date or whether to ferment in a cement vat or a stainless steel tank. So ultimately, for me, it's have you produced a wine which is balanced and that I can drink, that's refreshing. Maybe it's elegant, maybe it's fun, maybe it is a bit funky. But if it's funky within parameters that are delicious, then that's also fine.
Yeah, it's nice to hear you talk about the consumption. That I don't know if you agree with this. For me, wine is food. Food is just as an apple or an orange is, and I'm trying to be careful about what I drink. And you come across as somebody, I mean, you look very fit, by the way. I don't know if you sort of go running and things like that, but you're clearly someone that does look after his body. So much so, I was reading that you documented for a month everything that you drank. Is that true?
That's correct, and I did that during January actually, because I was getting so hacked off by the sort of dry January posturing.
So dry January is basically when people don't drink any alcohol, right? They have a month of no alcohol.
They do, and of course what happens is you see a lot of people kind of being very proud that they're doing this or being very sanctimonious about it, and I actually think it's quite unhelpful, and I would agree with the point of view that many people have put forward, that I think if a lot of people kid themselves, if they take a month off in January, then it doesn't matter what they do for the rest of the year. And there are probably even people out there who are really drinking way too much, but they use this dry January as a device to say, look at me, I'm fine, I'm in a good place. And I don't think it's helpful. And I think in general the discussion around whether alcohol is dangerous or how much drinking is too much is a very poisoned one. Unfortunately, we have a very powerful anti-alcohol lobby these days, and increasingly powerful actually, and you can see that in government recommendations and legislation even. So this exercise was really just an attempt to draw attention to let's have a different discussion, let's have an honest discussion about how we consume wine or other alcohol and what that might mean.
Do you ever worry about your own consumption? I mean, not that we're going to talk about this all the time, but I mean, obviously in wine we are, dinners and lunches and tastings and things like that. I mean, apart from that, if you just say you're writing a book and you're at home for most of the day, for a few weeks, do you just drink anything at any time, lunchtime or whatever, or drinking a lot, or do you have days where you don't drink at all?
Yeah, I have days when I don't drink. I very rarely drink at lunchtime unless I'm in a incredibly beautiful wine region and a winemaker puts a glass of something delicious in front of me. But of course, I'm not going to say no. But yeah, I try to be sensible. But of course I do worry about it. I think I've never worried about it from the point of view of worrying that I'm dependent or an alcoholic. But the problem is, I genuinely love wine. I love drinking it. I love tasting it. So there's always that thought at the back of the mind. Is this going to go too far? Am I going to suddenly find that I'm over-consuming? So one of the reasons for my project during January was kind of just as a reality check, really. Let's have a look at this and see what it looks like when I document it, and also see what other people think. I was curious to see if I'd get horrified reactions of people sending me private messages saying, Simon, do you think you should slow down a bit, old chap? Or would the opposite happen and people would say, crikey, that's so moderate? And actually it was more the latter, I'm pleased to say.
Yeah, you did. If I remember, you had one day when you didn't have any alcohol, and the other day you were very honest, it seemed, about documenting.
I had a few. I think I had 6 days in January where I didn't drink anything. But I also had some days that were, that were quite, how shall we say, sociable.
So going back to your family, the idea that you grew up in a sort of self-sufficient farm, and were your parents, I guess, they were professional farmers? Were they sort of hippies, or because you could, living in Amsterdam, which is a pretty laid-back place, is that sort of a theme in your life of sort of live and let live?
Yes and no. Actually, the funny thing is, even though my parents came from the time of hippies, they were absolutely no such thing, really. But they definitely picked up on some trends that were developing during the late 60s, early 70s, and I think actually it was more my mum. She grew up with this kind of powerful sustainability and self-sufficiency drive in her family. And they farmed actually during the Second World War. Her parents were conscientious objectors, and so they chose farming instead of fighting. And my mum always felt that it was instilled in her that growing things and doing it in a sustainable way is really the only sensible way you can live. So I think she indoctrinated my father, and we just grew up with this as a sort of powerful life model, really. So they weren't professional farmers. They were people. I'm sorry, my dad's still alive. I'm referring to him in the past tense, but he is still kicking around. But they're people who loved food and drink and loved to have the freshest and highest quality produce they could get their hands on. And of course, inevitably that draws you towards growing your own things and even producing your own meat or whatever. So
what's your relationship with Italy then, given that it is known for its food, and a lot of people still do? I'm in Tuscany now, and my neighbours on both sides are growing food, and we have a vegetable garden. Everybody has one around here. Is that also a part of your own sort of DNA?
I can't say it's part of my DNA, but I think it's what is true to say is that Italy has probably become my first love when it comes to a food nation. I think. I mean, when I was younger, I always used to believe that France was the be all and end it all when it came to food and wine, and then I sort of had a bit of a revelation really from about 2010 onwards. I started travelling to Italy regularly. It was serendipity in many ways, and discovered incredible wines that fascinated me. Obviously, specifically the macerated wines, aka orange wines of Friuli and so on. So there was so many reasons to keep coming back to Italy, and I think it really made an impact on me that Italian food is purely about celebrating the quality of the ingredients and not doing too much to get in the way. And I really love that ethic.
So is Friuli one of your favourite regions then?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, especially the Collio. Really, when I say Friuli, I'm really using that as shorthand for the Collio.
And why is that area so special for you?
The Collio is special for me because it's really the area where the modern renaissance of orange wines began, and orange wine as a topic is just something that's obsessed me for 7 or 8 years now, and obviously resulted in this book which I wrote. And I also find it called Amber Revolution.
It's a great title. That should be your PR guy, you know. It's a very Amber Revolution is it's a very, very good title.
Yeah, thank you.
But are you in that book? Are you sort of blindly loving every single winemaker that you met, or are you being sort of objective in your judgments and commentaries?
Oh, I'm quite objective, but the thing about Amber Revolution is it's fundamentally not a guidebook or a textbook. It's actually a story, and it's the story of 2 or 3 individuals who really had a fight on their hands to try to convince the world that what they were doing had some relevance and the wines they were producing were actually worth considering as fine wines. So it's a good old-fashioned story of personal struggle and overcoming a massive face of negativity, I guess.
Who were the 3?
Well, I mean, Joško Gravner and Stanko Radikon are 2 of the most major characters in my book. Sorry, it's probably slightly more than 3. And then I also talk about several of the key Georgian winemakers who really spearheaded the kind of parallel reinvention of traditional Georgian winemaking. So we're talking about people like Ramas Nikoladze or Georgi Dakishvili.
So if you're at home and I turn up and you put a bottle of orange wine on the table, what would be a good dish? What would you offer me to eat and say this is a good food and wine match?
Well, it depends on which orange wine, and actually you've given me an opportunity to bang another drum that I like to bang here, because I think orange wine for me is such a broad church. You know, there is as much variety in this style as there is in white wine or red wine. So in a way, the question you've just asked me, if you put a white wine on the table, what would the food match be? It's the same question with orange wine, so it depends so much. What I would say though is that since most orange wines have this textural element, which maybe isn't such a big part of white wine, in general they're incredibly versatile food wines, and then typically I find if I'm cooking anything that has a kind of salty umami element, then I know that I'm going to find an orange wine that's going to pair really well with that. But it could be meat, it could be cheese, it could be spicy Asian cuisine. I've had success with almost everything really.
Have you ever been tempted to make your own wine?
Yes, kind of, and actually I have done so twice so far, just as a collaboration. So I helped make a wine in the Douro Valley when is it now? Gosh, it's 3.5 years ago. And then I also did a collaboration wine here in the Netherlands, and that was 2 years ago, although we've actually kind of repeated it every year, although with more limited effort from me.
Why the Douro?
Because I have good friends there, and in particular there's a winemaking family called the Quevedo family who I know very well, and they basically they invited me to come and make an orange wine, so how could I refuse?
And what about obviously you write, I mean, do you do other things? Do you like host tastings, and how do you earn a living?
Yeah, it's the usual mixture, I think. Yeah, I host tastings and masterclasses, and obviously speak at conferences or other events where people invite me. So it's a combination of that, and I work as a freelance journalist, again focusing on natural wine, so that narrows the options a bit. And then the book and all the spin-offs from the book have actually become quite a significant chunk of my livelihood as well.
So the spin-offs like key rings and tablecloths and things like that, or spin-offs in terms of speaking and writing and all that sort of thing, and yeah.
Speaking and writing, and also, I mean, what was quite unexpected with this book is that this year, by the end of this year, it will be available in no less than 5 foreign language editions.
Amber Revolution, great, yeah. That's really good. And what are in the foreign languages? Any weird ones? Or
it's I think they're almost all weird. I mean, the only one that you won't be surprised at is Italy. So it'll be published by an Italian publisher in a few weeks from now. But it's already come out in a Korean edition and a Taiwan edition in traditional Chinese. And also later this year it will come out in Japan and in Ukraine.
Well, how did that all come about? Did publishers contact you, or did you actively promote this and convince a publisher to do these translations, or how did that work?
No, actually, in all cases, the publishers contacted me, which I have to say was it did put a smile on my face, because this book was a self-published book. It was rejected by every half-decent publisher with a wine list on the planet. So it's ironic in a good way that now publishers are coming to me and wanting to publish it in other languages.
Yeah, I've done a book, like you, just nobody wanted to publish it, so I did it myself. And then it's funny how I think maybe it's almost like they let you test the water. And of course, as soon as it comes out, and then somebody knocks on the door, we'd like to buy that book and publish it, etc., etc., etc. So anyway, I think we've. Have we missed anything out?
You could ask me what my next book's going to be about, perhaps.
All right, go on. Let's plug that one. Go on. So, have you? so after the success of Amber Revolution, do you have any other books in the pipeline?
I do, actually. So for maybe the last 5 or 6 years, I've been visiting Portugal quite regularly and really falling in love with the diversity of winemaking and wines and grapes that you can find in that country. I think far more than almost anyone is ever exposed to. So I have a narrative-based book about Portuguese winemakers, which I'm working on now, which I hope will be hitting the shelves, if not by the end of this year, then very early in 2021.
So a narrative, you mean like their story in terms of what, not just a boring old book saying I tasted this wine and it smelt of raspberries. You're really into the personal,
exactly,
the personal narratives.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's effectively that's what I tried to do in Amber Revolution as well. Is I talked a lot about it being a book that's a wine book that's more like a novel. So with the idea that you can cozy up to it in bed and read it and enjoy it. And I swear that I won't mention medium plus acidity anywhere.
I think that's a good approach. I mean, it's far more interesting reading about what people do and their raison d'etre, and rather than just, we fermented this at 20 degrees C for 3 days and it smells of raspberries or whatever. I think that kind of hopefully that kind of book is on its way out. So I just want to say thanks, Simon, for sharing your love of amber wines and explaining to us about all your various projects. You seem to live a very full and varied life, so well done you.
Thank you. Well, I'll try to carry on doing that.
I'll be your, if these books work, I'll be your PR manager. I'll be the worst PR manager on the planet. But you won't rumble it initially, but after a while you will. So this guy is completely useless. But no, well done to you. You've carved out a niche, and a niche within a niche almost, and you're making a great success of it. You're a brilliant communicator, and it was great to interview you. And I like reading what you write, and you're good conversationalist as well. So thanks a lot.
Oh, thank you very much, Monty. High praise indeed.
All right, mate. I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay, good.
I just want to say thank you to my guest today, Simon Woolf, for talking to the Italian Wine Podcast, explaining his love of amber wines. There we go.
Listen to all of our pods on SoundCloud, iTunes, Spotify, Himalaya FM, and on ItalianWinePodcast.com. Don't forget to send your tweets to @ItaWinePodcast.